She should have been celebrating a historic season, another championship, a fourth MVP, and a Time magazine cover that officially stamped her as one of the greatest to ever play the game. But instead of letting that moment speak for itself, one sentence changed everything. WNBA history was erased for a minute. That line didn't feel accidental. It didn't feel subtle. And to a lot of fans, it felt like a direct message aimed at one person, Caitlin Clark. Because while this was supposed to be A'ja Wilson's victory lap, the timing raised eyebrows immediately. Clark's rookie season didn't just break records. It rewrote the league's visibility overnight. Sold-out arenas, unheard-of TV ratings, a flood of new fans who had never watched a WNBA game before. For the first time in years, women's basketball dominated mainstream sports conversation. And that's why this moment matters. For months, fans noticed something strange: the silence, the cold shoulders, the lack of public support from established stars while Clark carried the league into a new era. It felt off. People brushed it aside, said fans were overreacting, said it was just competition. But then came that quote. And suddenly, the pieces started to click. Because this story isn't really about one interview or one comment. It's about two completely different mindsets colliding at the exact moment the league is changing. One player looking back, protecting legacy. Another looking forward, expanding the game without tearing anyone down. And when Clark finally responded, she didn't do what everyone expected. What she did instead flipped the entire narrative and exposed the difference between clinging to relevance and becoming the future. On paper, this should have been untouchable. A'ja Wilson had just secured one of the most prestigious individual honors in sports. Time magazine's 2025 Athlete of the Year isn't a casual accolade. It's a stamp that places an athlete in a much bigger cultural conversation, beyond stats and championships. It's supposed to be a moment of reflection, pride, and legacy. And to be clear, Wilson earned it. A dominant season, another championship run with the Las Vegas Aces, a fourth MVP that cemented her status as one of the greatest players the WNBA has ever seen. This was the kind of achievement that usually ends debate, not starts one. But then came the interview. In the middle of what should have been a pure celebration, Wilson dropped a line that instantly shifted the tone. She said that WNBA history was erased for a minute. No names were mentioned. No fingers were pointed directly. But the implication didn't need explanation. Fans, media, and even casual viewers immediately connected it to one person, Caitlin Clark. The reaction was immediate because context matters. That minute, Wilson referred to just happened to line up perfectly with Clark's rookie season, a stretch where the league experienced a tension it had never seen before. To many, Wilson's words didn't sound like a defense of history. They sounded like frustration. What made it land even harder was the setting. This wasn't a heated post-game comment or an offhand remark caught on camera. This was a carefully curated Time magazine profile. Every quote was chosen. Every word was weighed, which is why so many people felt this wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Wilson could have used that platform to uplift the league as a whole. She could have framed her success as part of a bigger story, one that included the wave of new fans and energy pouring into women's basketball. Instead, the focus subtly shifted toward what she felt had been overshadowed. And that's where things started to unravel. Because when an athlete reaches the peak of recognition and still feels the need to push back, it raises a bigger question. Was this really about protecting WNBA history? Or was it about feeling displaced in a league that's suddenly changing faster than anyone expected? And once that question was out there, fans started looking back at everything that came before, and what they noticed next only added fuel to the fire. The reason that single sentence exploded online wasn't because fans were looking for drama. It's because everyone knew exactly what moment it was pointing to. When Caitlin Clark entered the league, the WNBA didn't just get a talented rookie, it got a spotlight it had never experienced at this scale. Almost overnight, everything changed. Arenas that once struggled to fill seats were suddenly selling out weeks in advance. Road games turned into event nights. Television ratings jumped so dramatically that networks reshuffled schedules just to make room for fever games. Even casual sports fans, people who couldn't name more than one WNBA player before, were suddenly tuning in. That's the context behind Wilson's comment. So when she said WNBA history was erased for a minute, fans didn't hear concern for the past. They heard frustration with the present. Clark's rookie season didn't erase anyone's legacy, but it did shift attention in a way the league had never seen. Media coverage followed Clark everywhere. Headlines centered on her performances. Jerseys flew off shelves. Social media engagement exploded. For longtime stars, that shift was uncomfortable. This wasn't just about basketball excellence anymore. It was about cultural pull. Clark became the face of women's basketball to a massive new audience, not because the league handed it to her, but because the market responded. Fans showed up, viewers watched, sponsors invested, and that kind of attention doesn't spread evenly, it concentrates. What made the tension worse was the contrast in momentum. A'ja Wilson was still dominating on the court, winning titles, collecting MVPs. But off the court, the conversation had shifted. Clark wasn't just a player, she was a phenomenon. And phenomena don't wait their turn. That's why Wilson's words felt personal, even without names attached. To fans, it sounded like someone watching the spotlight move and not liking where it landed. Not because history was forgotten, but because attention is finite. And here's the part that really stuck with people. Wilson didn't say this during Clark's rise. She didn't say it during the record-breaking nights or the sold-out arenas. She waited until her own moment of maximum visibility to say it. That timing changed how the comment was received. And once people noticed that pattern, they started asking what else had been said, or more importantly, what hadn't been said at all. What made Wilson's comment linger wasn't just what she said. It was everything she didn't say before it. Throughout Caitlin Clark's entire historic rookie season, one thing stood out to fans paying close attention: the silence from some of the league's most established voices. Clark shattered records week after week. Attendance milestones fell. Television numbers climbed. The Indiana Fever reached the playoffs for the first time in years. Yet from A'ja Wilson, there was no public congratulations, no acknowledgement, no welcome message to the rookie who was pulling millions of new eyes into the sport. For a league that often emphasizes unity and collective growth, that absence felt noticeable. This wasn't about demanding praise or forcing validation. It was about leadership. Wilson has long positioned herself as a face of the WNBA, someone who speaks about empowering other women, growing the game, and lifting each other up. Those messages resonated. Fans believed them, which is why the lack of support during Clark's most visible moments felt out of sync with the image Wilson projected. When Clark faced intense physical play, questionable fouls, and openly hostile road crowds, Wilson stayed quiet. When online discourse turned toxic and Clark became the lightning rod for every larger conversation about the league, Wilson didn't step in to de-escalate or redirect attention toward the basketball itself. She remained on the sidelines, publicly at least. That silence didn't go unnoticed. Fans started asking uncomfortable questions. If Clark was truly good for the league, why wasn't she being embraced? If unity mattered so much, why did it feel selective? These weren't accusations. They were observations forming in real time. And then months later, Wilson finally spoke during her Time magazine feature. That's when the silence suddenly mattered. Because instead of using that moment to reflect on how far the league had come or acknowledge the surge of interest Clark helped generate, Wilson chose language that sounded defensive. To many, It felt like she skipped every opportunity to uplift Clark when it mattered most, only to speak up when the spotlight shifted back to her. Whether intentional or not, that sequence shaped perception. Leadership isn't only about what you say when you're winning. It's about how you act when someone else is rising. And once fans noticed that Wilson's first major public comment about Clark came wrapped in criticism rather than support, the narrative changed. From that point on, people weren't just reacting to a quote. They were reacting to a pattern, and that pattern would become impossible to ignore as the story continued to unfold. This is where the story starts to feel less accidental and more revealing. During Caitlin Clark's rookie season, a consistent argument surfaced from established voices around the league. The attention, they said, was unfair. Too much focus on one player, too many headlines, too much individual praise in a league that was supposedly built on collective effort. The message was clear. Women's basketball wasn't about stars, it was about the whole league. Whenever Clark dominated national conversation, the pushback followed. Some players and executives suggested the spotlight created division. Others implied that Clark's popularity ignored the history built by generations of black women who laid the foundation of the WNBA. The framing positioned Clark's recognition as something taken, rather than something earned. And A'ja Wilson echoed those sentiments. She spoke about how dangerous it was to elevate one player too much, about how individual acclaim could overshadow team success, about how history shouldn't be forgotten just because a new star arrived. The tone suggested moral high ground, protecting the league, honoring the past, and keeping the spotlight shared. At the time, many fans tried to understand it. The league had fought for visibility for decades. Of course, there was sensitivity around who benefited when the attention finally came. But then the calendar flipped. Fast forward to now, and Wilson stands alone on Time magazine's cover as the 2025 Athlete of the Year. One face, one name, one story, no shared credit, no team mention, no calls for collective recognition. And suddenly, the arguments disappeared. No public voices demanding that the entire Las Vegas Aces be celebrated instead. No reminders that basketball is a team sport. No concern about individual accolades being divisive. The same logic used to criticize Clark simply evaporated the moment Wilson benefited from solo recognition. That contrast is impossible to ignore. If individual attention was truly the problem, this moment should have sparked the same discomfort. But it didn't, because the issue was never really about individual recognition. It was about who was receiving it. When Clark was the one drawing the spotlight, the narrative became fairness, balance, and shared history. When Wilson received that same spotlight, it became deserved, earned, and unquestioned. And that's when many fans stopped giving the benefit of the doubt. Because principles that only apply when someone else is winning aren't principles at all. They're preferences. And once people noticed that shift, from collective credit when Clark rose, to individual celebration when Wilson did, the storyline changed from misunderstanding to hypocrisy. And from there, the dots started connecting fast. At a certain point, this stopped being about opinions and started becoming about evidence. Because while narratives can be debated, numbers don't lie. And the numbers surrounding Caitlin Clark's rookie season told a story that made a lot of people uncomfortable. The WNBA didn't just grow in 2024, it surged. Attendance spiked in cities Clark visited. Teams that rarely sold out suddenly couldn't keep tickets available. Television ratings jumped to levels the league had never touched before. Networks actively pushed for more Indiana Fever broadcasts because Clark guaranteed viewers. That kind of pull isn't manufactured by media, it's driven by demand. Merchandise sales followed the same pattern. Clark jerseys flew off shelves at a pace no current WNBA player could match. Her name dominated online searches. Her highlights flooded social feeds. Sponsors took notice immediately, locking in deals that pushed women's basketball into new commercial territory. And here's the part that mattered most. None of this required tearing anyone else down. Clark didn't campaign for attention. She didn't call herself the future. She just played, and the audience responded. For established stars like Ja Wilson, that shift was hard to ignore. Wilson had built her legacy through years of excellence, championships, and MVPs. But Clark achieved in months what usually takes a career: cultural relevance beyond the sport itself. That's where the tension became unavoidable. This wasn't about basketball skill anymore. Wilson could still dominate on the court, but Clark was dominating the conversation. And in modern sports, conversation equals power. Visibility drives money, influence, and long-term legacy. The league's future was tilting toward a new kind of star, one who pulled in fans who didn't grow up watching the WNBA. From that perspective, the frustration starts to make sense. When Wilson talked about history being erased, fans heard fear of displacement. Not because Wilson's accomplishments were suddenly meaningless, but because the center of gravity had shifted. The league was no longer moving at the pace veterans were used to controlling. And the timing of Wilson's comment only reinforced that idea. She didn't speak when Clark was breaking records. She didn't speak when the league was booming. She spoke when the spotlight returned to her, and that's when she chose to remind everyone of what came before. That's why so many fans stopped seeing this as coincidence. The numbers made Clark impossible to ignore. And when reality starts reshaping a league faster than its leaders are ready for, resistance often shows up disguised as principle. But what happened next would completely flip how this story was remembered. After Wilson's Time magazine interview made waves, the basketball world waited. Fans assumed Caitlin Clark would respond eventually. The only question was how. And given everything that had built up over the season, most people expected friction. Clark had options. She could have ignored it and let the controversy spiral. She could have posted something vague that fans would dissect line by line. She could have subtly clapped back and let social media do the rest. Honestly, after months of silence from veterans and a comment that clearly questioned her impact, no one would have blamed her. But that's not what happened. Instead, Clark did the exact opposite of what the internet wanted. She took to social media and publicly congratulated Ja Wilson on being named Time magazine's 2025 Athlete of the Year. No qualifiers, no side comments, no despite everything energy, just praise. She highlighted Wilson's season, her dominance, her accomplishments, the kind of message you'd expect from a supportive teammate, not someone who had just been indirectly criticized on the biggest stage possible. That single post instantly changed the temperature of the conversation. Where Wilson's interview felt defensive and backward-looking, Clark's response felt calm and forward-facing. It didn't escalate anything. It didn't feed into division. It quietly exposed it. Fans noticed immediately how different the tones were. One player used a celebration to draw lines. The other used controversy to extend respect. And the timing made it even more powerful. Clark didn't wait for the backlash to fade. She didn't post days later when attention moved on. She responded right as the debate peaked, when emotions were high and reactions were loud. In that moment, she chose composure over ego. That decision spoke volumes. It showed that Clark wasn't interested in winning online arguments. She was focused on positioning herself as something bigger than the drama itself. While others framed success as something that could be threatened, Clark treated it as something that could be shared. And suddenly, the story wasn't about Wilson's comment anymore. It was about leadership. Fans began comparing actions instead of words. One player used her biggest platform to defend her place in history. The other used hers to lift up someone who hadn't done the same for her. Without saying a single critical word, Clark reshaped how both players were perceived. And in doing so, she made one thing clear. The future of the league isn't just about who scores the most points or wins the most awards. It's about who understands how to carry the moment when everything is watching. Once the dust settled, the contrast between these two moments became impossible to ignore. Not because fans wanted to pick sides, but because the difference in leadership styles was suddenly crystal clear. A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark weren't just reacting to the same situation. They were revealing how differently they see the league itself. Wilson's approach came from a place of protection, protecting history, protecting legacy, protecting a hierarchy that took years to build. From her perspective, the spotlight shifting so quickly may have felt like something slipping away, even if her on-court dominance never wavered. Her words suggested a belief that recognition is fragile, something that can be taken rather than expanded. Clark's response showed the opposite mindset. She didn't treat success like a limited resource. She didn't act as if praise for someone else somehow diminished her own impact. Instead, she behaved like someone who understands momentum, how growth works, how attention compounds, how celebrating others strengthens the entire ecosystem. That's why her reaction resonated so strongly. Fans weren't just impressed by what she said. They were struck by what she didn't do. She didn't center herself. She didn't remind people of her records. She didn't reframe the conversation to her benefit. She simply acknowledged excellence and moved forward. And in today's sports culture, that kind of restraint stands out. This moment reframed both players in the public eye. Wilson, whether she intended it or not, came across as someone guarding the past. Clark emerged as someone building the future. One seemed concerned about who gets credit. The other acted like credit multiplies when shared. Sponsors noticed, media noticed, fans definitely noticed. Because leadership isn't about demanding respect when the spotlight is on you. It's about what you do when it's on someone else. Clark understood that instinctively. Wilson, in this moment, appeared to miss it. That doesn't erase Wilson's greatness. Nothing can. Her resume is secure. Her place in WNBA history is locked. But moments like this shape legacy in a different way. They define how players are remembered beyond stats and trophies. And that's why this situation landed so hard. It wasn't a feud. It wasn't trash talk. It was a quiet collision between two eras. One rooted in guarding what was built. The other focused on accelerating what's possible. And as the league moves forward, that distinction may matter more than any MVP count ever could. By the time everything played out, it became clear this was never just about one quote or one Instagram post. It was about perception, and perception is powerful. In a league fighting for sustained momentum, moments like this don't fade quietly. They shape narratives that last far longer than any single season. For A'ja Wilson, the irony is hard to miss. Her accomplishments remain undeniable. Championships, MVPs, dominance that few players in league history can match. Nothing said here takes that away. But legacy isn't only written in box scores. It's written in how players handle transition, especially when the spotlight starts to move. For Caitlin Clark, this moment did more than silence critics. It solidified why she resonates beyond basketball. She didn't posture. She didn't escalate. She didn't turn attention into conflict. She absorbed it and redirected it in a way that made the league look bigger, not smaller. That distinction matters. The WNBA is at a crossroads. New fans are watching. Sponsors are paying attention. The next generation of players is taking notes. And what they saw here was a clear example of two paths. One that treats growth as a threat to be managed. Another that treats it as fuel. Clark's response wasn't strategic in a corporate sense. It was instinctive, and that's why it worked. People don't just connect with talent, they connect with tone, with energy, with how someone carries success when the pressure is highest. Wilson, intentionally or not, framed the league as something that could be overshadowed. Clark framed it as something that could expand. One narrative closes doors, the other opens them. And that's the lasting impact of this moment. This wasn't about picking heroes or villains. It was about watching a league evolve in real time and seeing who understands that evolution. The future of women's basketball won't be built by guarding the past. It'll be built by welcoming what comes next. That's why this story struck such a nerve. Fans didn't just see a disagreement. They saw a turning point, a glimpse of what the WNBA could become and who might lead it there. And if this is any indication, the next era won't be defined by who demands the spotlight, but by who knows how to use it. When all the noise finally settled, this moment stopped being about quotes, interviews, or social media posts. It became a referendum on direction. Not who's better, not who's more accomplished, but who understands where the league is actually headed. A'ja Wilson stands as a pillar of what the WNBA has been. Her resume is secure. Her dominance is documented. No comment, backlash, or controversy can erase that. But this episode revealed something deeper than accolades. It showed how difficult transition can be when a league shifts faster than its leaders expect. Wilson's words came from a place of preservation, a desire to make sure the past isn't forgotten. That instinct is understandable, but preservation, when paired with defensiveness, can quietly turn into resistance. And in a league fighting to grow, resistance reads louder than intention. On the other side stood Caitlin Clark, a player who didn't ask for the spotlight but knows how to carry it. Her response didn't win headlines because it was clever. It won because it was calm, because it showed confidence without insecurity, because it made room instead of drawing lines. That's why fans reacted the way they did. They didn't just see professionalism, they saw vision. Clark didn't treat recognition as a threat. She treated it as momentum. She didn't see success as something to guard. She saw it as something that multiplies when shared. And that's the difference that matters most. The WNBA isn't choosing between players, it's choosing between mindsets. One rooted in scarcity, one built on expansion, one looking backward to validate legacy, one looking forward to grow opportunity. This moment didn't diminish Wilson. It clarified her role in the story, and it elevated Clark beyond stats, beyond records, beyond rookie narratives. It showed why sponsors lean in, why fans stick around, why new audiences feel welcome instead of warned. The future of women's basketball won't belong to those who fear being overshadowed. It will belong to those who understand that light spreads. It doesn't disappear. And in this moment, without saying much at all, the future made its choice loud and clear.